Hey everybody, I'm Russ, co-founder and CEO of Blue Nest Beef, and today I'm here with Mike McGraw. Mike is, there you go, Senior Wildlife
Hello.
Biologist and Ecologist with Resource Environmental Solutions. I had the pleasure of working alongside Mike in a science project that's just pulling together on ranch land, farmland, grazing land in the Southeast U.S. And stuff he's been doing specifically with respect to birds is very relevant to what we're doing here at Blue Nest Beef. So, anyhow, Mike, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are.
Yeah, thanks, Russ. Glad to be here. I appreciate the invite. Mike McGraw. I'm a senior wildlife biologist with Res, which is an ecological restoration firm. As you know, Russ, when we first met, it was AES, and we recently joined the Res team here. So, it's my passion ever since I was very young is animals and working in wildlife. So I pursued a bachelor's degree in environmental science with a focus on ecology at Drexel. I'm a Philly boy through and through, Philly in the suburban area of Philadelphia, and got started working with Steve and others at AES. Went back and got a master's degree at Penn. Now I teach ornithology at Penn, and have had the great pleasure of learning from and working alongside some real giants in the ecological restoration field. Steve A being a big one. So, I've been really excited about urban ecology and all these other wildlife fronts. I'm a total snake nerd. I love reptiles and amphibians. But bringing this research into the heart of food production in America, North America, Canada, and the United States has been amazing and really eye-opening and really relevant. And hopefully, we'll dive into some of those points on relevancy, how critical it is to focus on wildlife within these working lands. So.
Yeah, cool. That's indeed the key phrase there. Working lands. How do we work with lands and ecosystems at the same time we make them better instead of degrading them? Right. That's personally, right. I would have never guessed it, but I believe it's possible. Tell us about the science project. We'll probably dig into that a little deeper later. But what was this science project that you were involved with? What was the structure and what was your role in it?
Sure, happy to do it. So we're all grateful that Peter Bick, who's the director and sort of overseeing the overlord of this project, pulled together this team of dynamic scientists from everything from soil scientists and people studying soil microorganisms and greenhouse gases, vegetation, the health of cattle. I'm just one cog in that wheel as a bird guy. I've had the great pleasure of assessing grassland bird occupancy within our study sites. And just for those listening, the study sites were carefully vetted and paired so that the soil katinas, the soil types, are identical. And we've removed as many variables as possible in the external landscape. So really the only difference between these study sites, these compared study sites, is the grazing practice, whether it's conventional continuous grazing or the adaptive multi-paddock grazing. Just laid out some systematic ways to collect bird data in an unbiased fashion so we could really understand. And I forgot to mention the insects, right? It's a super important aspect. Birds are this amazing indicator of ecosystem condition. There's hundreds of papers that have been published on the value of bird presence, absence, and what we know about the annual cycle of different birds to really tell us a whole lot about the ecosystem itself. So,
So how do you count birds in an ecosystem? How do you go about doing that?
Sure. So we're using a method that's used in a lot of the standardized breeding bird surveys throughout North America, but also in a lot of research projects. It's an unlimited distance, single observer point count. So basically we fix points within a location. We go out and we stand in that exact location for a set amount of time. and we're documenting all birds that we observe by species, by sex when possible, and then noting their behavior. And then also, really importantly for a project like this, their direction and their distance from us and what they're doing. Are they flying? Are they carrying food? Are they sitting on a nest? Are they just singing proudly over and over? So I mean, it takes, you got to know your birds pretty well, but that's a task you can do. I teach kids how to do it all the time. You know, it's we use this systematic method, and we repeat it in the landscape during the breeding bird season, which is really important, right? Because birds are dynamic, they fly. The birds that you see in the spring, fall, winter may be very different from the ones that are relying on that space during the actual breeding season, which in this case was May and June.
So in May and June, you got up early in the morning with the clipboard binoculars and went out there and stood and wrote down bird counts.
You got it, man. And I had to get used to a cameraman following me around. Normally it's just me and the birds and a couple cows mooing. But yeah, we're up before first light. You know, there's birds that only sing for a brief amount of time before the sun ever really hits the sky. And actually a couple grassland birds are really well known for that, while other species will sing all day. So it's really important we get out there really early in the morning and we're set and we're ready to rock as the sun starts coming up.
Cool. Teresa says, our little meadowlark and Bryce and I are listening to you. Awesome. It's nice to have a meadowlark listening to us while we talk. Certainly a distinctive grassland bird. Mike, I don't know if you know, when I first started into this kind of soil carbon stuff, we started a project for figuring out if this was a big deal. We called it Project Meadowlark, and I had no idea that was like a future-looking statement on where this would go. In the bird study on this science project, it was Steve, actually, your colleague, who said, you know, in addition to counting insects, in addition to counting microbes, in addition to counting water infiltration, and in addition to counting carbon, we ought to count birds and see what it says. So you did that. And what are some of the things that you saw? And I'm so glad that we did do that. But what did you observe in the bird counts between these different management practices?
Sure. I mean, so our hypothesis was that we would see obligate grassland nesting birds in both, but that there would be a difference in both diversity and abundance. One of the things that was anecdotally observable, but now, and I'm sure others have done it, but even just within our research group, I think there's 5, even 6 papers already published, including one on landscape ecology, one on vegetation. Sam Mosier published their paper on soils, and I think, and both our breeding bird paper and Jonathan Lundgren's has an insect paper that's coming out soon. So, you know, we know with confidence that structural diversity within the pasture and having live roots and you know, last winter's grasses and, you know, that structural complexity provides options for more birds, i.e. more diversity. So we speculated that we would find, you know, differences in the breeding bird communities, and sure enough, we did. At some farm paired comparisons, it wasn't a drastic difference. It might be a similar diversity, but the abundance was greater in the AMP fields. And there's a common theory in when studying breeding birds. It's a function of habitat suitability. If the territory is really good, then you don't have to expand as far to provide resources for your partner and to raise your young. So you'll have a smaller home range. So smaller home ranges result in more home ranges within a given space, i.e. greater abundance. So just seeing a difference in abundance from one field to another of, let's say, eastern meadowlark speaks volumes about the productivity within that farm shed. But then, interestingly, there was also bird species that we just didn't find at all occupying the conventionally grazed locations that were not only present, but in some cases thriving in the AMP grazed population. So our site in Alabama there's literally just one fence between these two properties. The management is exactly the same. In the amp grazing field, we had a robust breeding population, not only of grasshopper sparrows and eastern meadowlarks, which are relatively adaptive. You'll find them in conventionally grazed fields as well. Not only did we find them in good numbers, but also dick sisal, which is much more common further west, but is in drastic decline in the east. And so to see that this farm field, that's where they're producing this, good beef, and that's, this rancher's making a living raising cattle, is also stewarding a population of dick sisal in the southeast, which is really nice. And also northern bobwhite, which apparently a lot of folks get excited about. There was bobwhite in the one property. You could hear them technically from the other property, but when you look at, this is why it's important to take note of direction and distance. When we're standing there in the morning on that conventional site that's literally across the fence, I remember hearing a bobwhite, but it was to the west-southwest, 500 plus meters away. It was not occupying the grassland I was standing in, but rather the one on the other side of the fence. So it's kind of neat.
Yeah, I've got a friend here in Texas, famous. He leads an organization called the Wildlife Habitat Federation, Jim Willis, and he kind of tongue-in-cheek calls it the quail-proof fence, where, and it's just another wire fence, but it's really, he's got natural habitat on his side of the fence, and that's where all the quail are, and they don't leave to go next door. So how much of a difference did you see between some of these things? You said some of the sites were fairly close, but were some of them pretty dramatic then? And
some of them were quite drastic. Yeah. So, for example, we had one field comparison where there was just one species, one territory. We had one eastern meadowlark male singing his heart out, trying to maintain a territory in what looked like turf grass, it's just chomped down to the ground. And this is, this was May, really high vegetative productivity time, right? Just, there should be a lot of grass out there, but due to the management practice, it's been heavily grazed. And then his neighbor had waist-high grass, and with flowering plants, there was insects. In the morning, you couldn't help but mow down spider webs while walking through the field. There's just, you could just feel this robust community. And over there, not only do we have meadowlark, I think we had from just one, actually, so, and there's 2 points in each field. Out of those 2 points in the first field, in the first one mentioned, one meadowlark. In this other one, we had 16 singing males. And we were readily observing, carrying food, seeing females. And then we also had grasshopper sparrow. We had ecotonal species, so species that aren't full grassland obligates, but they require grasslands for a portion of their territory, i.e. loggerhead shrike, blue grosbeak, brown thrasher, these edge species that nest in a shrub that's typically associated with a grassland. So, it was night and day. We had, I think, 6 obligate grassland breeding bird species, and the abundance was through the roof, from literally one individual to, I think, well over 100 on the other site in just those, in 2 points. And, we're not making the assumptions that a female's there or young. It's only the birds that with confidence we've observed, and we're not double counting, right? Like if I'm standing here and I hear bobolinks singing, I'm isolating each individual singing male. So I know, okay, there's 5 different bobolinks singing from this point right now. And the study design is such that the next point is so far away that we're not going to be impacted by that overlap.
Okay. I want to get onto some audience questions here, but I can't let it slip. Bobolinks. As you know, we've got a product out called Bobblings, but what are some particular requirements? What
I know about it. All right.
Awesome.
When you told me about it, and I immediately bought 80 of them. My partner and I, both of our kids, are chowing these down every single day in lunch. I've been handing them out at birding hotspots when I'm birding. Everybody loves it, Russ. This is a killer strategy and a tasty treat.
Well, it's simply the tip of the spear, if you will, on the mission, right? We're here to restore grassland bird habitat and regenerate land, and it's really fun to put that on there. And I honestly didn't know much about bobolinks a few years ago, and one of my now farmer friends in Iowa, Phil Specht, got me real interested. He's turned his farm into a a grassland bird sanctuary, but bobolink specifically. But what is it about bobolinks? They got a really pretty song that's fairly unique and cool. But what do they like in terms of habitat that's different?
Well, I could go on and on about bobolinks, so I'll try to be quick. Well, first off, it's functional taxonomy. The name is Dolichonyx oryzivorus. Dolichonyx means sweet black, and if you look at these birds, they look like they have a backwards tuxedo on. You know, all that stunning black in the body. Sweet black, oryzivorus, rice eater. So they're granivorous. They eat lots of grain, grass, seed. That said, they are omnivorous, and like most grassland birds or even most granivorous species, when they have young in the nest, they're running insects to them all day. I mean, all day they're feeding insects. Insects are very high in fat and protein, which is really important for rapid development. So, you know, the bobolinks nest in grasslands. They require pretty large tracts. And so, I mean, it's amazing. It's really truly heartbreaking when you look at, you know, massive pasture land that can't support these birds because they require big open grasslands. What are pasture lands? Big open grasslands. So I've taken great pleasure, I mean, truly great pleasure in studying pasture lands that are using amp grazing or mob grazing, these methods that really mimic how bison would migrate through an area, feed aggressively, stomp things down, and then they're off the land for 100 days or whatever, you know? So to see bobolinks coming back into these spaces is absolutely delightful. They're beautiful. They nest on the ground or just above the ground. They'll pull together. They'll weave grasses together. And as mentioned, the males have this striking alternate plumage. The females are much more drab. They blend in with the grasses. They're yellows and browns with streaks. Really beautiful in their own right. And they're going to keep that nest cloaked, and both of them are going to work hard to bring insects to the young. So they absolutely need large-scale grasslands that have a diversity of graminoids, so seed-producing plants like grasses, native grasses, but then also they rely heavily on insects. So you got to have that pollinator connection. And again, this is why birds are such a great indicator of ecosystem condition, because the things that they need are a couple critical elements that provide so much other value and other ecosystem services. So
it's just the whole ecosystem. Yeah, Bruce says thank you. Let's get to a couple of questions. I could go on forever, Mike. I could keep you occupied. Teresa says, you mentioned the dick thistles. Did you survey any surprising bird species in your study? Were there any other surprises?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with this particular study, we did pick up a Henslow's sparrow, which is a super rare bird in the East. They're declining in where they're most common in the northern Midwest as well. But we suspect that bird was a late migrant moving through, but that was really neat. And honestly, like most research efforts, you hope to answer solidly one or two questions, but about 15 more questions pop up. You know, at that point, it was like, man, I wish we had some acoustic recording units out here or something that could be capturing how important this management practice is, not only for breeding birds. I mean, we're starting there, but what about birds in migration? What about the literal billion birds that are moving through the landscape in September? Is this providing food and cover for all these animals to increase their chance of surviving this tragic and epic thing that is bird migration, you know?
Yeah, and we're just getting into it now. I live in coastal Texas and already starting to see the maps, you know, these bird migration maps. You probably have friends that work on them, right? The radar things, and they're already starting to light up. We've certainly seen a little bit of a change over here. Rick says, a question he's wondered about for a while: can birds be restocked like we do with endangered species, or are birds a kind of apex indicator that only respond when the ecosystem is ready for them? Great.
It's a great question, Rick. I think it's probably more so the latter, especially with something like birds, right? These are volant animals. They have wings. So many bird species have some level of migration, even if it's semi-nomadism. But especially in this grassland realm, these are all migratory birds. So it's sort of the if you build it, they will come strategy. And when you really put together these building blocks, these foundational puzzle pieces to the ecosystem, the birds show up. And again, I think it would be risky to try to release a whole bunch of bobolinks or something else because there's just too many variables. Where were those birds born? They're likely going to have some sort of genetic driver. After the first breeding season, if they stick around, they may migrate to where, the latitude where they were originally came from. There's just too many variables. I think it's the latter. We rebuild the landscape, and then as long as they're not birds that have gone extinct or fully locally extirpated, there's that hope. And we've seen it, of bringing these birds back into the landscape just by virtue of creating the habitat.
Yeah, to me, again, I'm no bird expert at all, but it's obvious that birds have a huge advantage, and that is they can vote with their wings to go where it's better. So if there's better somewhere over there, they go. And so you definitely see them. Okay, let's talk about this working lands thing, because indeed, so many environmental people feel like there's this tension between working lands and environmental conservation. In your experience and view, what can what can working lands do, or how do working lands contribute towards recreating bird habitat and habitat for other wild critters as well?
Russ, great question. And I'll first mention that, I have no stake in the game here. My mom does come from a farming background in Dutch Pennsylvania near Hershey and Shamokin. But I grew up in Philadelphia and in the suburbs of Philadelphia. I was very disconnected from the agricultural world. And, there's so much I didn't know about food production in general. And there's so many great things that I've learned through the last 5 or so years of doing research in working lands. But really taking this unbiased, objective approach to studying these working lands, it's become painfully clear. I mean, I just don't know how this isn't the standard already. The ability to sequester carbon, to keep soil where it's supposed to be, to stop breaking this nutrient cycling issue where we cut food from this area, drive it over here, give it to this animal who then poops a whole bunch here and it ends up in this stream, right? I mean, the animals are part of the nutrient cycling process. And if we can bring the animals to the food versus bringing the food to the animals, then we've solved the problem just leaning on a natural principle. It saves money, it saves time, and has huge benefits, not only for people, but the farmers. The farmers are saving money. They're increasing their food bank account, right? I mean, how many of the people in this study were able to objectively say that they don't have to spend money on, hey, they're not supplemental feeding their animals, which could be a significant cost for somebody, especially in the South. If you run out of food in your pastures come April or May, you got a long season ahead of you that's going to be very costly to feed those animals, and you're going to have to rely on other people cutting their pastures and bringing it to you. The nitrogen, the nutrients, fertilization. By moving the animals, you're spreading out the fertilizer. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here, but it's really, I guess the take home is most grasslands are working lands now, whether it's in row crop production or food production, and we're not going to stop eating food. It's not realistic to take a conservationist perspective of, only having profane and pristine and reverting, functional working lands to grasslands with no pulling ungulates, foraging ungulates off them. So this really is the solution. I mean, I don't know another way. And I would have an intellectual conversation with any conservationist who thinks otherwise. I think we've mounted a body of scientific data that suggests this. I'm not saying we should, destroy relict prairies and convert them and graze them. No way at all. We should manage those with fire and other natural processes to keep them as is. But for land that's already been converted to food production and is owned by family farmers that are working to make a living, and it's their right, and this change in the management practice is a win-win. It really offers a glimmer of hope for grassland breeding birds, which are in precipitous decline, without affecting or potentially positively affecting the pocketbook of the landowner.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that last part's been my experience as well, and it's certainly why we're here. We want to be here so that people can choose to buy a food product that is, involved in the process of recreating habitat, and the rancher gets rewarded for that, right? By
Russ, you'll be really happy to hear this, and I'm proud to share this with you. So we had a design charrette with a landscape architecture group that we work with often, amazing group, Simone Collins. And I ever since I bought these, I've been giving them away to people. I'm promoting you guys because I truly believe in it, right? You can feel good about eating this, right? So I brought some of these and realized that the majority of their office is vegetarian. But I said, hey, for any of you who eat meat or have partners that eat meat, I brought some of these and I'd like to share them with you. I explained the process. One of the landscape architects, she's a conscientious vegetarian. One of the reasons she doesn't eat meat is because she doesn't feel good about how, concentrated animal feed operations for dairy and, the way that pasture lands we're losing topsoil at an alarming rate, et cetera. When I explained this process, she said, you know what, like this, I'm excited to actually I haven't had beef in a while, and I feel good about eating this because of what it is, right? I mean, that's a big nod to you, my friend, and
that's awesome.
I hope to see more people.
That's what we're here for. I mean, all for people choosing what they want to do, but if we can provide a nourishing food that comes from a place that's nourishing the planet at the same time, we think that's a big win. Probably our last question here from Eric. He said, I've been reading about a huge drop in insect populations. What have you seen in your field work? Should we focus on rebuilding insect populations in order to rebuild bird populations?
Well, Eric, you're in for a real treat. When this data set drops, it's believed to be the largest insect data set in current research, possibly ever. I mean, it's robust. And the take home is, yes, you're absolutely right. Some people are not inappropriately calling this the insect apocalypse right now. They're sort of the canary in the coal mine. We've seen precipitous declines in insects in abundance and diversity in so many different biomes, and here in North America as well. This amp grazing practice is definitely showing an increase in abundance and diversity of insects, which is absolutely critical for breeding birds. So you can't rebuild breeding bird habitat without focusing on plants and structure for insects. So, I mean, it's a huge yes to everything you said.
Yeah, I like that, Mike, because it's true. I think one of the big advantages we have with birds is they're big enough to see and they're pretty when we hear them. But when you set foot in an ant pasture, one of the first things you see is the dragonflies, the butterflies, the multiple species of bees and small wasps and pollinators of all sorts. And then you look down and you see the dung beetles are making Swiss cheese out of the dung pats, right? And Jonathan and his team with the insect stuff. Maybe we'll do that. We'll get Jonathan and Ryan, the guy who led a lot of the insect part of the paper, on a call here soon as well. Because
I think it'd be great. They
all go together.
Yeah. They're so interconnected, and we've already started comparing the insect data with the bird data. And Eric, as you may or may not be surprised about, we're seeing some things that tend towards what you would assume, right? Sometimes the science supports the anecdotal observations, and in some areas it's not. We're not seeing strong correlations between birds and insects in some scenarios, and in others it's just a resounding, obvious yes. More to come on that. Russ, I'll just mention that even though I know we're running out of time, but I see a couple other cool Yeah, Brad mentioned bobolink is skunk bird. I just wanted to shout that out. Hilarious term for that bird, and totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think indeed that's what makes this science fun. And many people here know that I come from the world of dead carbon, sucking dead carbon out of the deep earth so we can put it in your gas tank. That's my prior life up until 8.5 years ago. And I'm so fascinated by the living carbon world of the shallow earth and all the ecology that happens in the first few feet below the ground, the first few feet above the ground. And like you said earlier, one of the coolest things about the science going on in here is for every question you answer, you get 15 more.
That's right.
And I just think we're going to be learning for a long time. But I think the thing we're going to learn is that when we work with land in a way that mimics what the land is trying to do, what the ecosystem is trying to do, good things happen. And when we just kind of go out there and kind of stomp into it and do what we want to do, we shouldn't be surprised that it has some unintended consequences.
Right. And I'll tell you what, Russ, I feel I'm still youngish. I'm 42. I've been doing this for about 20 years. The thing, I learned something new every day. Had a great walk in the field with a client this morning and learned stuff. But one of the things that I think is truly missing from native landscapes is the culture, the human culture within those landscapes. You think about all the indigenous cultures, the huge diversity of humanity that was here that's been essentially erased or compartmentalized. We're missing that human component. And while this is not restoring indigenous cultures by any stretch of the imagination, by starting to change the culture of food production to going back to leaning on nature and focusing on tendencies in nature might have some cultural revolutions for us. We might actually learn something and be able to better appreciate some of the things that are barely present in history books that are so important to living on this land,
What a great way to end it. It's like deep philosophy from that's so profoundly true. I think rediscovering the way our indigenous ancestors looked at ecosystems and then figuring out how we can mimic those again is a key part of where we go. All right. Hey, I told people we'd have a special deal for them if they sat through and listened to us. So we've got a discount code for folks today. Mike, what is the discount code?
Birdman80.
Birdman80. So Birdman80, if you want some Bobblelinks, you'll get 80% off your first pack of Bobblelinks by going to bluenestbeef.com and using that code Birdman80. It'll be good until just midnight tonight. So if you watch this on replay before the day is out, the code's still good. If it's after midnight, you're too late, and check back next month for our next AMA. So Mike, super
Don't wait till next month, though. They're reasonably priced to begin with. So get yourself some of these. They're real good.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Truly, sincerely, that's just an awesome conversation. We could go on for hours, I know. Thanks for joining us. We'll keep an eye on the chat. If there's any additional questions that come up, we'll ask you some more in the future. But super thanks for taking time out of your day to be with us.
Happy to do it, my friend.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
That's all. See ya.